Good afternoon. Happy Thursday afternoon, everyone. House Taxation meeting will come to order. Our first item would be requests for bill introductions. Do we have any requests this time? Seeing none, we'll move right along to our first item of business today. That is a hearing on House Bill 2220, and turn first to the reviser for an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2220 would establish a 5-year property tax exemption beginning with tax year 2024 for all property used by any city, county, or township in the state that is leased for the purpose of establishing a business incubator. Property leased to a business shall be exempt for a period of not more than 5 years. After the calendar year, the business commences its operations on the property. After the 5-year period, only the portion of properties being used by the business still operating on the property will be subject to tax. The bill limits property tax exemptions so that no new exemptions shall be granted after December 31st of 2029. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Adam. I just want to clarify, this is property that is currently either owned or controlled by a local government that's not being utilized. Is that correct?
That would be correct. It would have to be owned by to be property exempt under the exemption that applies for municipal property, has to be owned by the government entity. The issue is when you lease then, or when the government would then lease property, it would not be utilized by the government entity itself, which then would be subject to property tax. So in a sense, what this does is allows the property exemption to remain in effect for 5 years for this property that's still owned by the government entity, but then lease for that period of time. But then after 5 years, it will then come back on the roll for the extent for that for the property still being used for that one purpose.
Okay, thank you. Committee, any questions? Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Adam, what's the definition of a business incubator?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. It's on subsection B of the bill. As used in this section, incubator means a property under public ownership that would provide temporary tenancy to startup micro-entrepreneurs, micro-enterprises, new technology development entities, or commercial entities at below market rates for a term of 5 years or less.
So what if they don't make it? What if they go out of business in less than 5 years?
In a sense, the property would still remain tax exempt. So it really would have no other impact I can see. The business would be, kind of the property tax and the business itself are two separate components. But the property would be currently tax exempt. It would stay tax exempt. If the business went out of business, the property would just still stay tax exempt. Would be my understanding.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is this kind of to follow up? Representative Alcala, I'll get to you next, but I just wanted to follow up on Representative Sanders' question. I guess I didn't read the bill when I originally read through it. I didn't have this mindset, but if there was a business that was in there for 4 years and then that business didn't make it, could they offer the same 5-year plan to a new business? Is it specific to the business or is it specific to the property to where, a new business, another one after the first one might have failed, could come in and still utilize that same 5-year window?
It's my understanding that it runs with the business, not the property. So if a new business comes in, that essentially would restart the clock. And if someone has a different interpretation, I'd be willing to listen to that. But my understanding of how the bill would work is that if it runs with a business, so if a business lasts for 5 years and holds over, essentially, then that property for just that business's purposes would be subject to the tax rules. If a new business would come in, it would restart the clock, is my understanding of how it would work.
Okay, perfect. Representative Alcala.
So I had several of these incubators in my district, and one leaves, another one comes in, that whole process starts all over again, so they get the whole new. But my question is, some of these incubators, you can gives you a place to meet and have an office space. Some of them, they let you in there at no cost, but others, they charge you. So I guess my concern is if there's I didn't see it in the bill, but it's been a few days since I looked at it. If there's a fee for that, then I might have problems voting for tax exemptions. So is it up to the organization, the municipality that owns the incubator, to say whether or not they're charging a fee or not? Or is there something in here that says, no, if no fee is charged, then there's tax exemption?
Generally, if there'd be no fee charge, mostly the property wouldn't really need the provision, because it really doesn't, the tax exemption doesn't get lost until they would lease out the property. So to some extent, I'm not sure that if they didn't charge a rental fee or something like that, if they just allowed someone on their property without payment, I don't think they would probably lose the exemption. The municipality wouldn't lose the exemption to begin with. So probably the nexus of the bill would almost require there to be a rental fee for use of property.
So maybe I was confusing with that question. So say the incubator is owned by the Chamber of Commerce, so the Chamber of Commerce is not tax exempt. So if they charge a fee for the property, they're the ones that get the tax exemption, because the business is under the umbrella of them under the incubator. Is that correct?
It would actually be the owner of the property would get the tax exemption, and that would be the municipality. Because even if the municipality would then, unrelated to this bill, if they would lease out the property, they would still be in theory liable for the property tax if owed on the property, not be the renter.
Okay. I might be a little confused, but I understand what you're telling me. Thank you.
Representative Butler. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just thinking through this and thinking of just different communities I'm in and work with them, and some that are talking about incubators. Is this something more for the city themselves to undertake as far as giving the tax abatement for those buildings, or tax incentive for the buildings? I don't know. I'm just curious.
It would apply to a city, county, or township buildings. Essentially, there's a specific provision that would exempt, that would not include school buildings. However, in provision A, it really just applies to city, county, and township. So if they have excess capacity, I'm assuming in any properties they would own, that's the exact buildings that would apply, or real estate. I'm not sure I answered your question.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. I'm thinking, because a lot of them are somebody may own it. So I may go buy a building and set up an incubator process there that people come in a year, they're in there, a year, they're out of there, because they're trying to start up their businesses, which are great things. So I own that building. And so I guess that's my question. Would it be better for a city to be the person, the point of contact for giving that tax, I guess an abatement then for that building for those 5 years? Or is that something, I may not be questioning this, right? But instead of leaving it up to the state to do that.
I might be able to answer that question. I don't know. You can correct me here, Mr. Severs, if I'm being wrong. But right now, the cities, counties, townships don't have the authority to do that without this law. Now, let's say you had a building, I don't know, I'm just going to use a hypothetical, that had $2,000 in property tax. If it was leased out to the business, that would be an additional $2,000 that the city or county or township would have to recover in the form of a lease. So maybe by passing this, like giving them that 5-year window, they could offer a much more competitive or a reduced cost lease for a startup business. I don't know if that is accurate, or if that.
Yeah, you answered my question. I had forgotten that the city does not have that authority to do that. I understand that. I just had overlooked that in my brain.
Okay, and correct me if any of that was wrong.
You're correct, and I think the only point I would have to add is these are properties that have to be owned by the city, county. This isn't like an abatement that the city gives to a private individual's property. These are properties that are owned, the real estate that is owned by the city, county, or township. So it's already under their ownership, which then is currently exempt from property taxes. But once you lease it for monetary value, that gets pulled off of the exemption and put back on the rolls. So that's kind of, it gives us a kind of a carve out for that, for just these limited 5-year period.
Representative Stockstill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've served on the board of directors for a couple of incubators, and both of them have been affiliated with universities. Is that covered under a separate statute, or would we want to add university property to this as well?
To be honest with you, I'm not familiar on the university incubator aspect. What their property tax provisions would allow. This would only apply to just the cities, counties, and townships. So that's about. I don't know if somebody else could answer that, but I don't have anything further at this point to offer.
I believe I introduced this bill on behalf of Department of Commerce, so we might visit with them and see if that's an amendment they would be favorable towards.
Thank you.
Any further questions for the revisor? Seeing none, thank you for that. Next, turn to Kathleen Smith with Department of Revenue for an overview of the fiscal note.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, House Bill 2220. We do not have data on the property that would receive a property tax exemption under the provisions of this bill, and so therefore an estimate could not be given at this time.
Thank you, and I knew that was probably going to be the case, but
and if the proponents have more information, we'd be more than happy to try and drill down.
Right. And as far as the state's concerned, if there was a property that qualified, it would just be on the 20 mills and the 1.5 mills for
Correct.
the building funds.
Yep.
So thank you. Committee, are there any questions for Kathleen? Seeing none, thank you. At this time, we'll open up our proponent section testimony and welcome first Tricia Purdon. I hope I got that last name correct.
It's close enough. It's
okay.
fine. I'm Tricia Purdon.
Welcome to committee.
Thank you very much, Chairman Smith, and thank you very much to the committee. I'm Tricia Purdon. I'm the Director for the Office of Rural Prosperity in the Kansas Department of Commerce. We are excited to present this. The Kansas Department of Commerce supports House Bill 2220 and requests the House Committee on Taxation pass the bill favorably. We really believe that this will help spur small business and entrepreneurship growth in Kansas as it continues to be a top priority for the Kansas Department of Commerce. House Bill 2220 creates a mechanism to really lower the operation costs for small businesses and entrepreneurs as they're just getting started. The purpose of the legislation is really to decrease this upfront cost of incubator operation and tenant expenses to really encourage more business startups. And coming from rural, we know we need more of those across our state. Incubators owned by a city, county, or a nonprofit would be property tax exempt, and they're currently property tax exempt as they stand now. If the purpose of the space is to grow a business and locate the business in Kansas after incubation, they would be property tax exempt as well. This will help support small businesses development, especially in rural communities with vacant buildings and underutilized spaces. The program would help turn these underutilized buildings into thriving businesses and thriving ecosystems across our state. Some key elements for you to consider as you're working this bill. I want to make sure that we point out that the incubator space would only be eligible for those tenants that have been in business for less than 5 years. So they have to actually be startups, something that's new to the community and to the state of Kansas. The program would not include school buildings that are currently being used for classes for K through 12. So if an empty school building was to be used and owned by a municipality, they couldn't have this incubator in a currently used school. But like one of the questions had been before, the city could then release the space if someone did leave that space to a new company that would start that 5-year term over. In summary, the intent of the bill is really to provide a temporary tenancy that is exempt from all property taxes for that initial 5 years. After the 5-year period, the tenant can remain in the space and begin to pay property taxes based on the square footage of that space and the building being leased. Or they can move out and move into a new building and revitalize another portion of their town. We are hoping that this legislation creates a new way to support small businesses, entrepreneurship, and economic growth across Kansas, and I urge you to pass House Bill 2220. I'm open for questions.
Thank you for your testimony. First question is Representative Sawyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay. When I read the bill, I only see that it says the property has to be owned by a city, county, township, or the state. I don't see you. It sound like you said in your testimony something about a nonprofit. I don't see the bill addressing that.
Maybe I missed that. I'm sorry. I thought that it did include the nonprofits in there.
I don't see it. It's in-
Okay, it probably got changed in the revisor's office, and I just missed that one. So yeah, if it's city, county, or municipality owned.
Okay, all right. I just want to clarify that. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Stogstill, do you want to re-ask your question of this conferee, or do you want me to?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wondered, how do you handle incubators that are associated with universities or colleges? Is there different standards there, or how does that work?
No, I'm not an expert on taxation, but I will say that we would be open to universities using this program. Universities are great at incubating businesses, especially if they can allow research and support with new technologies and development. Be more than open to allowing that.
Okay. I'm a big proponent of incubators, so
Yes.
I'm hoping we get this passed. Thank you.
Representative Alcala.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I've got a question was there a request in the Department of Commerce budget for dollars for incubators to create partnerships with municipalities?
No, there was not included in this.
And so I did hear you say that if a business or startup business stays longer than 5 years, they can pay rent to stay in the incubator. Is that correct?
After 5 years, they would have to start paying property taxes, plus probably rent. It's going to be up to that municipality of how they want to structure that deal. But they would have to start paying property taxes based on the square footage.
So, yeah, so based off of incubators probably hold what? 12 small businesses, maybe 12 offices or whatever in a conference room. So what happens when that fills up? If the business continues to want to stay there, there's no time limit. So you actually lose the incubator because they want to continue to pay, because the rent is a considerable amount less than what it would be if they went and got a building.
I would assume a municipality would put it at market rate rent upon that 5-year incentive period opening, but it is actually, it's completely up to that municipality how they want to structure that. In some very rural communities, I could see that, hey, this is a thriving business and it supports our community and it's a great place for them, and they don't have another potential tenant. But in another community, like Overland Park, that maybe have lots of opportunities, I could see them saying, okay, now you have to pay market rent, and maybe they want to find another location.
So in the request for the bill, have you guys researched to see what the success rate in Kansas has been with incubators?
Well,
'Cause
I
know
don't know
two
what
of
it
them
is
in Shawnee
statewide, but I
County.
know as a previous economic developer, incubators worked phenomenally well.
Do you have data to support that?
Yeah, so I was the economic development director for Montgomery County, Kansas.
Slow down, I lost you.
Sorry. I was the economic development director in Montgomery County, Kansas for about 10 years. We owned 2 buildings in downtown Independence that we used as incubators. Those turned over 4 or 5 times. And eventually the business was so strong that they purchased it from us and turned it into a massive business themselves. And they are still continuing to thrive and grow and expand.
I knew we had 2 incubators here in Shawnee County and they both had closed down. And so, but other than your knowledge of where you were at, has the Department of Commerce looked across the state to see the success rate of incubators in Kansas?
I don't have that data right now, but I can certainly look for that for you.
So you do have the data, they have looked.
I'm sure we can get that data, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I've only been at Commerce for about 1.5 years, so I'm
There's no excuse.
still learning all the things that we have in our
Send Dave Tolman up
wheelhouse.
here if you don't know the answers.
Yes.
Next question is Representative Bryce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Purton. This very good presentation. I am very excited to hear about this kind of public-private partnership and what it could do for rural Kansas. A lot of places like where I'm from in Coffeyville, there are empty buildings. I just wondered if you have any idea of estimating from past experience what kind of impact or maybe how many businesses you predict, or it'd be difficult to predict what you would dream of being affected by this. Thank you.
I'll use some data that I got last year. We had about 25 counties that came to me and said that they really needed this in order to fill locations in their city halls and in municipally owned buildings that were currently vacant. So I would assume at least a minimum we had 20, but most of those had multiple spaces inside of them. I'll use, for example, the city of Coffeyville. They have an entire basement of their city hall that has been completely renovated, and it's white boxed, which means it's set up to be a place for tenants, and it could hold up to 25 tenants in that location. So I would assume that it really opens opportunity for dozens, if not hundreds of new businesses in Kansas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have two questions. One is, how come, I think the prior person talked about incubators in colleges. You know, I'm thinking about community colleges also. How come they're not included in this bill?
We really focused on, and my thought when we originally put this bill together was underutilized city-owned buildings across Kansas. I cover rural, and so I'm hearing from our rural communities that we have half of our city hall is abandoned, or we have an old school building that is not being utilized at all that the city could own and then turn into an incubator. That was what we kept hearing over and over again. I'm more than happy, though, to include community colleges and universities in this, as they're experts at incubating businesses. ICC, for example, is a great opportunity where they have maker spaces, and I know those are all over our community colleges, and those are automatic incubator spaces that they can help grow.
And then my second question would be, you know, these statutes like this are in place often to stop um, our local units of government going into competition against entrepreneurs. So for instance, something like this, how do you view the competition that it creates for existing landlords in downtown areas that are probably already having trouble attracting tenants?
Well, the thought is that these are brand new businesses. They've not been in business at all, except for the last 5 years. So they have 5 years to have created their business. Ideally, you're hoping that you're generating more and more businesses. When you have a downtown that has more than one business in it, you're going to have more foot traffic and more competition, and more businesses is going to come to your town. So the thought is, if we can incubate these in very small spaces, and then when they grow, they can move into those downtown locations, and you'll get more foot traffic for their competitors as well.
Thank you, committee, for the questions. Any final questions? Representative Abraham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, reading through your testimony, Bill, but do I understand it correctly that the city would lease these spaces to the business owners?
That's correct. Again, though, they could structure it however they need to make it make sense for them.
So they could, the lease agreement doesn't have to be kind of a market rate for that space in that area?
Right, we left it flexible, so that way the municipality can make a decision that fits their community and their economy the best way it could.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any final questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Committee, that's all the proponents that I show. We do have a written proponent. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on House Bill 2220? Seeing none, I also have no opponent or neutral testimony. So we will close the hearing on House Bill 2220. And last item of business for the day was to take action on House Bill 2109. And we'll give everybody a few minutes to pull that up and then have the reviser give us an overview.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2109 would amend the threshold to be eligible for the Social Security income subtraction modification in determining Kansas adjusted gross income. The $75,000 threshold that currently exists in statute would remain in effect. For taxpayers with income greater than $75,000 and less than $100,000, a formula would provide a percentage of the Social Security income to be eligible for the subtraction modification. And then taxpayers with incomes greater than $100,000 would not be eligible for a subtraction modification.
Thank you, Adam. Committee, are there any questions? Seeing none, we will open up discussion on House Bill 2109. And I'll go ahead and start off. I have an amendment, and I'll let the reviser pass that out. But this is basically a phase-out amendment, and I'll go into more detail as soon as we get that in our hands. Oops. This is an amendment again to phase out eventually the cliff that we have right now. It'll take the current slope and then phase it out over a period of 4 years. So before we get any farther, I'll look for a second. Representative Hoheisel for a second. And there's a lot of language here. I think I'll turn your attention to the monitors. I'm trying to share my laptop screen here. I want to explain what this amendment is doing. Currently, the red line indicates, I'll explain what you're seeing here first. The left side axis, the vertical axis is 0 to 100%. This is going to represent the taxable rate on Social Security benefits. The bottom horizontal axis is going to represent taxpayer federal adjusted gross income. I just put a range in there from 50,000 to 200,000 to show the phase out. The lines that you're seeing there, the red line shows the current statutes, the way it goes from at 50,000, 60, 70, up to 75,000, 0% of your Social Security benefits are taxable. And then instantly at $1 more, it jumps up to 100%. So that's a visual of the cliff that we talk about with Social Security income. House Bill 2109, as it stands right now, is represented by the green line. It's a slope from 0 to 100%, starting at $75,000 again, and maximizing, or the ceiling is then at $100,000. The fiscal note, if I remember correctly, was about $20 million the first year, and then it dropped to about $15 million. As I looked at phasing this out, I wanted to be a little bit more aggressive and phase it out a little quicker than $15 to $20 million per year. So I extended that range, that first blue line, I extended the range from $75,000 up to $125,000. So that's fiscal year or tax year 2024. And the fiscal note on that was 49.4, or tax year 23, first state fiscal year 24. Is that correct? Okay. Words matter. I better make sure I'm saying the right thing here. For the taxpayer year, tax year 23, fiscal year for the state of 24. And then all I did to phase it out was I doubled the range each year. So that second year would be the next line over. The third year would be that lightest blue line, the most gradual slope there. Let's see. Eddie, do you have those numbers on the fiscal note or the out years? I think it was 49.4 for the first year, 63. I'll let Eddie get those. I don't remember. Sorry. Ultimately, when it's all phased out, it's at about $125 million on fiscal year 27. But I'll let Eddie give you the breakdown on what each year amounts to.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The estimated fiscal impact the Department of Revenue has provided for this is for fiscal year 24, an impact of negative $49.4 million. For fiscal year 25, an impact of negative $63.5 million. An impact in fiscal year 26 of negative $93.4 million. And in 27, negative $124.4 million. Beyond 27, the tax is exempt every year. So it's kind of the more index type growth after that year.
All right. So having seen the graph, and that's what the revisers have done a great job of building those formulas into words here. So it's a rather large bubble amendment, but ultimately this is what it's trying to accomplish. And I would be happy to take questions. Representative Epley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this creativity. It's interesting. Am I to understand, I just wanted the committee to understand by 27, then their Social Security would no longer be subject to income tax.
That's correct.
And so it's about a 4-year slog to get there.
That's correct.
And the ultimate fiscal note on that at 27 was what again, Eddie? Mr. Chairman, if I may ask.
Certainly.
Thank you.
So this would be effective for tax year 26, which of course, by and large, it's not perfectly matching up with the fiscal year 20, say fiscal year 27, but 124.4 million, with it being exempted beginning in tax year 26, is the fiscal 27 estimated impact.
Okay. And I have one more question, and
Go ahead.
and I appreciate again the spirit and the creativity, but is it tied to any ending balance or any SGF percentage or anything such as that?
It is not. It is a hard number each year, or a new formula each year.
So one last question to you, Mr. Chairman. That is, we are leaning on future legislatures to stick with this and honor it. I mean, they could deviate if they wished, if circumstances necessitated that.
Yes, and that's actually a good point you bring up. I phased this out on purpose. If we do hit a recession, it does provide the ability, if they want to freeze that and not continue to go ahead and phase it out. If we've hit a crisis in the state with state revenues, it does allow a future legislature to pause that if they need to.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted the committee to be aware. Thank you.
Representative Sawyer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, so I'm comparing your amendment to the underlying bill. The underlying bill, for people making less than $100,000, well, if you make less than $75,000, you'd pay zero income tax on your Social Security. Between 75 and 100, you would pay some tax on your Social Security. And then if you make more than $100,000, you would pay full state income tax, whatever your bracket is, 5.7% on your Social Security. Well, so that's the underlying bill, and it costs about $14 million a year. But we're helping the people that make $100,000 or less get the breaks. If I understand your amendment, once it's phased a bit, once it's fully phased in, we're spending $125 million plus a year, go up slightly each year, instead of the $15 million, and it'll exempt everybody's Social Security. So those people making $250,000, $500,000, people that are retired but doing well, would pay zero state income tax on it.
That is correct.
That's correct. So we're spending an additional $110 million a year. It's going to benefit people. All the benefit of that additional $110 million goes to people making over $100,000. So I guess in the big picture, when we look at the big picture, we were talking about that yesterday a little bit. We have so much money to cut taxes. It's who's cut taxes do we want to cut? Where do we want to cut them? And I guess my preference would be to help people need it more. Maybe provide property tax relief people that need it. Making sure we exempt the food sales tax, maybe exempt some other sales tax items, cut the sales tax rate. To me, that's spending a lot of money that helps people that probably don't really need it very much. Because we're spending an extra $100 million just to help people that all make over $100,000 a year. So I guess, I'm pretty well, I would, again, the big picture, I think I'd rather spend our money to help more people that make less than $100,000, I guess. So in the big picture. So I guess I prefer the underlying bill and not spend as much money on this thing that all goes to people making over $100,000. The extra cost.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. And I would be right there with you if we were the only state that was proposing this. This is in the spirit of competition with other states. And we've heard some testimony about claims that we're losing some of our retired folks because Kansas is not a friendly state to retire in. So I'm taking a look at Kansas policy. And if we were just looking at Kansas, I would agree with you 100%. Looking at some of our other states that do fully exempt Social Security benefit, income tax on benefits is the only reason for the phase out. Representative Sawyer.
What's interesting is, over the years, we see the demographics of Kansas, and we're actually one of the older states. We don't have a problem keeping our old people, people. We have lots of old people in Kansas. Our problem is attracting young people in Kansas and keeping our young people. So I don't think this really helps reach that goal that we really need, but appreciate that.
Representative Kessler and then Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you, this kind of made me start thinking again. Can you refresh my memory? I remember we had this conversation before about what was the average Social Security? How much money are we talking about being taxed anyway on average individual? What was that number again? Do you remember?
Might turn to research. We had looked at that. It seemed like that number was around 18,000. Maybe Representative Sawyer remembers when we were discussing this. Is that what you
Seemed
remember?
like it was 1,500 something a month, which would be about 18,000.
Right, roughly on average, about $18,000 a year.
That's what I was saying. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Representative Butler.
Yeah, I think thank you, Mr. Chairman, if we're keeping the older people here, those are the people that need the extra money, regardless if they're making 100,000, if there's two of them together and they're making $100,000 a year, they put into it, so I think those are the folks, if they're here, we want to make sure they stay here and they stay healthy. So.
Representative Bergkamp.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd probably more echo Representative Sawyer's comments. That, to me, I think once you get to a certain income threshold, I know you want to be competitive across different states, but I think also you look at sales tax and maybe we could buy that down by a couple tenths of a percent, or income tax. Obviously it's the body's will. It just seems like a pretty big number to spend on I think a segment that in my mind might not need this big of a break. Thank you.
Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you added 25,000 to the top end because it was 100,000 in the original bill, right?
That's correct.
Okay, so why 125?
As I said when I introduced the amendment, the original range, in order to phase it out, if we kind of did a balanced phase out over each year, to phase out $120 million at roughly $15 million a year would have taken almost 10 years. I wanted to phase it out a little bit faster, so I created a larger range and then extended that range each year until it phased out.
Okay, thank you.
I was just trying to be a little bit more aggressive in the phase out.
Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Epley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for a second time. Just to kind of segue off some of the other comments, and I can't remember, and legislative research may be able to help us with this, and I don't know. How many other states do not tax Social Security, and what are those states? Are they in our area? Or I'd like to know surrounding states' issues, and I don't know. I think that we need to attract young people that want to stay in the state, become old people, and enjoy this type of benefit. I think this is very fiscally responsible because it's a 4-year phase out. And I think it would appear to me that we could certainly do this without encumbering much of where we are right now. So I think we need to think of ways to keep our population here and have them those that are younger look forward to enjoying that benefit. But I'd like to hear, kind of stalling for legislative research to give us some information on other states that have a zero income tax on Social Security benefits. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, Representative Epley, I remember we're one of 13 states that tax it, but I can't remember what the map looked like as far as. Yeah, we'll keep talking and filibuster a little bit here while we. Okay, Eddie, go ahead.
So of our neighboring states, Oklahoma is the only one that has a full exemption for Social Security. Colorado, Nebraska, and Missouri all have a kind of partial exemption, so to speak, potentially similar in nature to Kansas, but where it's based upon an age factor or an income factor or an age and income factor, where there could be some Social Security taxed in those states.
Did that sufficiently answer your question, Representative Epley? Okay, thank you. Committee, any further questions? Seeing none, I will go ahead and close and move my amendment. All those in favor, please say aye. Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. Division's been called. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. Keep your hands up. We'll count them again here. And those opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, on the account of 12-8, the motion carries. So we are back on the bill. Is there any further discussion, committee? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to Representative Epley for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would be pleased to move that the committee pass out House Bill 2109 as amended favorably for passage.
Okay, thank you. And a second by Representative Hoheisel. Committee, you've heard the motion. All in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion carries. Okay, committee. Yes, Representative Helgerson.
I would like the minutes to reflect that Representative Corbett was not here, and this is the first time I can think that he would not be here jumping for joy on a chance to vote for this. After all these years of hearing him complain, he's not even here.
Duly noted. We'll I'm not sure the official record will show that, but your comments have been noted. And by the way, we would like to welcome Representative Scott Hill to Tax Committee. I failed to welcome you earlier, so welcome. You look much better than Representative Corbett. Okay, committee, I wanted to just briefly talk about the schedule for next week. Since it is turnaround week, we have plans to be on the floor Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So we will not meet. We will meet Monday and Tuesday. And we have a couple of hearings scheduled. And I want to run off a list of some of the bills that we've worked so far that could potentially take some action on if we have time. First one would be 2110. That is single factor apportionment. The second one is 2136. That is income tax subtraction modification for eminent domain properties that were sold through eminent domain. 2182, that is the film and media tax credit incentive bill. And 2229, that is the vehicle sales tax refund, Representative Turner's bill. And I will be visiting with my ranking and vice chair to see if there's any other bills that we need to get kicked out next week. But those are some of the easier ones. If you have any amendments you need to get prepared, have those ready for next week. If there's nothing else for the good of the committee, we are adjourned.